I was taking a road trip with my good friend Carter to visit some other friends from college. The drive was pretty far, about 15 hours, but we thought with the both of us, we should be able to do it in one long go. I started driving first, then about 4 hours in, Carter took over. The plan was for me to sleep while he drove, but I genuinely couldn't. I don't know what it was, but I was never able to get comfortable. So by the time it was my turn to drive again, I was pretty tired, maybe even more so than I was before he took over. I was still able to keep my eyes open and pay attention to the road, but somehow I never noticed the gas tank getting really low. We were driving Carter's old Chevy, which didn't have the fancy tech to alert you when your tank is low. There was just a gas gauge that I never even looked at. Wasn't until the car started sputtering that I quickly realized we had nothing in the tank. Carter quickly woke up and started searching on his phone for the nearest gas station. But not even 30 seconds later, I had to pull off the highway because the car wouldn't accelerate anymore. I felt so stupid. Even worse, Carter said the closest gas station was 4 miles up the road. We were kind of in the middle of nowhere. It was just plains all around us, and there were no other cars on the road. We talked over our other options for a few minutes, but ultimately Carter decided he'd walk to the nearest gas station and bring back a canister, while I stayed and just watched the car. Maybe not the best plan, but it felt like a waste to call for help and have to pay $200 just for some gas, when the station was still within a walkable distance. Although it was 1 a.m. and dark outside, Carter didn't seem bothered as he left the car and started heading down the road. Within a minute, he was out of sight. I sat back and basically just thought about how stupid I was for getting us in this situation. But just a couple minutes later, I saw headlights coming down the road from up ahead. They came down and passed by, but they were going much slower than they should have been. I think the speed limit was 55 or 60, and they passed by going maybe 15 or 20. I watched in the side mirror, and they didn't speed up after passing. They slowed down even more, eventually stopping and doing a 3-point turn to come back around. Honestly, I didn't want to admit I was out of gas, or needed help or anything. And I didn't have to. They came back down the road and passed by, even slower this time, like maybe 5 miles per hour, probably staring through the windows at me, before picking up speed and heading back the way they initially came from. What was that about? I kept my eyes glued to the road for the next few minutes, waiting to see if they came back around or not. I had a pretty bad feeling about it. Maybe it was just my gut, but I started to think something could go pretty wrong soon. I got my phone out and called Carter. I just wanted to let him know, and maybe to hurry up if possible. But the phone rang all the way through. He didn't pick up. That definitely made me worried, but maybe he just had his phone on silent, or lost service along the road. I waited a minute, then called again. Still nothing. At this point, I definitely wasn't being rational, but I made the decision to ditch the car and try to catch up with Carter. I think it'd only been 10 or 15 minutes since he'd walked away, so if he was still walking, surely I could jog and catch up in just a few minutes. I got out and made sure to lock the car, then started jogging down the side of the road. It was real quiet out there. So quiet that every time I took a break from running, I'd notice the ringing in my ears, only because there was not even the slightest sound to drown it out. I jogged for 15 minutes. I thought I would have caught up to Carter by then, unless something made him start jogging or running for some reason. I decided to pull out my phone and call him once more, and it was just then that I heard the sound of it ringing. It was very faint, in the distance, somewhere off the side of the road. I looked out at the nothingness past the shoulder of the road, and just barely, I could see a light glowing in the grass. My body tensed. "Carter?" He didn't respond. I couldn't see anything at all, aside from the dim phone screen glowing. I took a few steps off the road and into the grass, calling out again. Finally, I got a response. I could faintly hear Carter's voice coming from somewhere near where the phone was, but I couldn't tell what he was saying. I hurried closer, and Carter yelled again, and this time I could hear he was telling me to get down. I still couldn't even see him yet, but I did what he said, ducking in the grass. And that's when I looked back and saw a car coming down the road. I immediately knew it was the same one I'd seen, moving slowly, just like before. They were looking for us, or Carter, I guess. They made 3 or 4 turnarounds, slowly passing the area and very obviously searching for us. Once it seemed like they finally left, we got up and booked it to the gas station. Carter explained that the guy initially pulled over and tried to get him to get in his car. He said he was extremely creepy and really didn't hide the fact that he had bad intentions. After Carter refused, the man stepped out of his car, and Carter instantly took off running. I guess the guy thought he'd just continue running down the road, so he got back in his car to chase him, but Carter ran off the road, jumped in the grass, and just hid. At some point, his phone flew out of his pockets, and he was too scared to get up and reveal himself, so he just stayed hidden. Anyway, we got to the gas station and were able to get help. We also told the police about the guy, describing his car and everything, but they never found him. It was very much a horrifying close encounter, and I feel really bad even still for being the reason we were put in that situation. One thing's for sure though, I'll never forget to fill up the gas tank ever again. This was back in 2014. I almost never went on road trips back then, because I rarely had time to take multiple days off just to drive, plus the additional time to actually enjoy the vacation. However, I was in between jobs when my family was planning a surprise birthday for my dad turning 50. Back then, gas was way cheaper than it is now, and flying was a lot more expensive in comparison to the gas prices. So both to save money and because I didn't have a job at the moment, I decided to make the drive. To be safe, I made it a 3-day road trip, so after the first full day of driving, I pulled into the nearest motel and booked myself for the night. It wasn't the nicest place, but I didn't mind. I slept in until 11, then packed up and opened the door to head out, only to be startled by a man standing right in the doorway. "Excuse me." I tried to get past him, but he didn't really move, so it was a bit awkward. The man looked mid-40s and had heavy bags under his eyes. Just overall, not the kindest face. As I moved the rest of the stuff into my car, he remained creepily standing outside the motel room, watching me. Good thing I wasn't staying there any longer. I checked out of the motel and headed back onto the road. This was my longest day of driving. I planned to get at least 10 hours in. The first while went pretty good, I'd say. A lot of it was through towns and cities, and it wasn't until 5 to 6 hours in that they faded out and it became more rural, long stretches of road. Once I realized towns were getting few and far between, I stopped at the next gas station to fill up. I paid and started the pump, then headed inside to get a coffee for the road. When I was heading back to my car though, I saw someone pull their car up really close to mine. Like from the front, it looked like their bumper was touching the back of my car. It was a deep red, old Corolla. Nobody was outside of it putting gas in, and the windshield was tinted. I couldn't see anything at all through it. But knowing someone was in there, I couldn't shake the sense that they were watching me. I took the pump out and got back in, leaving the gas station. Almost immediately after, that car left too, again never having put gas in or anything, and pulled up behind me to merge onto the highway. I was hoping this was all just a coincidence and just continued with my drive. I noticed them behind me for a while, maybe 5 or 6 cars back. But as the sun set, I couldn't really tell what cars were what. I could only see a cluster of headlights behind me. As it got later, fewer and fewer cars were out, and I went about 4 more hours without seeing that car again. I'd almost entirely forgotten about it, figuring it was never anything to begin with. I was more concerned with trying to keep myself awake now that I'd finished my coffee. The nearest main city was still 2 hours away, and I really wanted to make it there and get a nicer hotel, maybe even check out the city in the morning. But that was only if my eyes would stay open long enough. I thought maybe if I stopped to get another coffee, not even for the caffeine, but just for the distraction of constantly sipping on it, maybe it'd be enough for me to power through the next 2 hours. At the next gas station, I merged off the highway. Right away, I could see it was closed, the convenience store section. I was pretty disappointed, but I did need to top off my gas anyway, so I pulled through and started filling it up. Almost right away, I saw a single pair of headlights pull off of the empty highway and begin down the exit ramp toward the gas station. This place was already creepy as is, just a standalone, dark gas station with nothing around it. Couldn't even see past the outdoor lights. So when I recognized the car coming down as the deep red Corolla from the other gas station, my heart rate instantly picked up. I couldn't stop myself from the eerie thought of if I was being followed. I hurried to unplug the nozzle and put it back, but the car pulled in extremely fast, not even going up to the pump, but pulling right up to the side of my car by the driver door. I was just able to get in before the passenger door of their car opened. A man got out, not even hesitating to run up to my door and try to open it. It took only a split second of looking at him to recognize the guy as the same man from the motel. Those unnerving eyes sent chills through me. I turned my car on, and when he realized he couldn't open the door, he stopped trying. I shot a glance at him as I pulled away, expecting to see anger or frustration, but what I saw was even more disturbing. He was grinning from ear to ear, like this was funny. Complete psychopath. I floored it back to the highway and didn't stop until I reached the city. Thankfully, I'm almost 100% sure I wasn't followed that time. What really scares me is that the man got out from the passenger seat of the car, so someone else was driving him and was in on whatever sick idea that guy had in mind. They followed me for over 10 hours from the motel, and even worse, they could have been following the day before without me ever knowing. I still find it hard to forget that road trip, even a decade later. A few years ago, when I was in college, I was heading home to meet up with my family over winter break. The drive was nearly across the entire country, so multiple long days in a row of non-stop roads. I was a broke college student though, so I wasn't booking any hotels or even motels. I packed some blankets in the back seat and figured I'd sleep wherever I could, whenever I got tired. Around 1 a.m., and after 11 hours straight of driving, I finally called it quits for the night. I was starting to get dangerously tired, so I found the next rest stop I could sleep at, and pulled over. It was one of those small pull-offs right on the side of the highway, meant for just a few cars or trucks. It had a little building with what looked like a washroom, and a couple vending machines. There was only one other car there, parked in the spot farthest back, so I parked in the opposite spot to give us both some privacy. Then I got up to stretch my legs and use the restroom real quick. It definitely wasn't clean in there, which was kinda gross, but I did my business, then left to go back to my car. When I did, there was a man standing right outside my window. He was looking in at what I had in there. Can I help you?" My voice visibly startled him. He nervously took a few steps back and chuckled, saying he was trying to see if I was in there to ask if I had some cash for the vending machine. My car was basically a fishbowl, all clear, untinted windows that you could easily see whether or not I was inside, so there was no reason to be pressed up to my windows, looking in like he was. "Yeah, I got no cash on me. Sorry, man," I said, walking around him to get back in my car. But to my surprise, he didn't leave. He actually tried to start another conversation, asking me what brought me out here tonight. I'm on a road trip. I'm sorry, but I really need to get some sleep. I can't really talk right now." I got in my car, and the guy did a sorry wave, then walked down to the other car and got in. I was a bit relieved to see he got in the car, and wasn't just a homeless person being creepy at a random rest stop. To be honest though, I think I was too tired to even feel uncomfortable, or care what that man was up to. I just wanted to sleep. Thinking back on it though, and in a normal state of mind, I probably would have just left and gone to the next rest stop. I reorganized the mess in my front seat, tossing everything in the back, then leaned my seats as far back as I could and tried to get comfortable. I had my eyes shut for just a few minutes before I could tell some lights were moving around outside my car, which made me open my eyes to see what it was. I sat up, seeing in the mirror that that guy had moved his car right up behind mine. I watched for a minute, unsure why he'd moved at all, but with things getting a little too creepy, I knew I had to take the L and just find somewhere else to sleep. I pulled my seat back up, tossed my car in drive, and got back on the highway. I had a few unfriendly words to say under my breath about that dude as I pulled away. There weren't a lot of places to stop at on this stretch of road, so this inconvenience was going to cost me at least 30 to 40 minutes. It was dangerous how tired I was on this drive. My eyelids would close for a second or two, then shoot back open once I realized I was dozing off. This pretty much went on and off the whole way, until finally I reached the next rest stop. Or what was a rest stop. It looked very similar to the other one, except it was without a doubt abandoned, or out of service. The building was all taped up and decaying, and graffiti covered most of the exterior. Still, it was a place to pull off, and I figured I wouldn't have any issues sleeping here just for a few hours. Not sure if it was because the place was quiet and abandoned, or me just being really tired, but I passed out within a minute. I have to say, before I woke up, I got some pretty good sleep. I think I slept from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. before I woke up violently to a crash against my car. The whole car shook as I scrambled to figure out what the hell happened. I looked in my left mirror, seeing a car's headlights parked right behind me. Then I looked in the right mirror. There was a man right beside my car with a metal baseball bat. He swung it again, bursting the back window. I kept yelling, "What the fuck," over and over, trying to get my keys and get away. The man came up to the passenger window, where I then saw it was the guy from the other rest stop. He had this sinister smile and started taunting me, saying "liar" repeatedly as he kept swinging the bat against my car, then staring at me with that smile and calling me a liar again. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I was able to get the car on and leave before it got worse. I called 911, phone shaking in my hand as I drove away. I was able to meet up with an officer at a gas station, where I explained the incident and was able to take note of the damage to my car. 2 windows were shattered, and dents were scattered all over the doors, and somehow I didn't notice that my back right tire was also slashed and almost flat. Another officer went to the abandoned rest stop, finding all the glass shards on the ground, but the man was already long gone. They notified all the patrol cars of the man's appearance and vehicle, but came up empty-handed. After being stuck in an unknown town for a few days to get my car fixed, I was able to make it home safely. It's crazy how insane some people are. I mean, I assume that guy lost his shit over something as simple as me not giving him a few bucks for the vending machine, or even just not wanting to talk to him at 1 a.m. on the side of a highway. The fact that I could have died that night over something so absurd is horrifying. Last November, I took a road trip out to my family's home for Thanksgiving. I lived around 20 hours away, which in road trip time is about 3 days of driving comfortably, and 2 days if really pushing it. This drive I'd done before, and hated it every time because of how incredibly boring most of it was. My parents lived on a small ranch that to me felt like the middle of nowhere, so a big portion of the drive was through nothing. Either just plain open fields, or vast untouched forests. After hours and hours of the same scenery, it always got painfully boring. The first half of the drive from leaving my city was always alright though. It was on the typical highways that mostly everyone takes if they were headed to or from a major city. However, it was toward the end of my second day of driving that I merged off of that highway and onto, I guess you'd call a side road. It was still a highway, but only one lane, and way less people drove on it, not truckers or anything, and it really only led out to smaller, less distinguished towns. I made it to this part around 7 or 8 in the afternoon, so I wasn't planning to drive too much longer. I hoped there would be a town I could pull off in that had a motel or something. I drove another 2-ish hours. The road was completely dark and empty, just my headlights lighting up the way through the fog. I hadn't seen a single place to pull off and sleep at, so eventually when I found a small gas station, I figured it was better than nothing and pulled in. Now this gas station looked extremely old. It looked like it was just some sort of family-owned place in the middle of nothing. I didn't see a single light in the distance of any sort of town or even houses. However, the gas station's lights were on, and I was able to use the pump to top off my tank. Afterward, I parked in a spot on the side of the building and headed inside to ask if I could sleep for a few hours in their parking lot. When I walked in, a single guy was standing behind the counter, looked maybe 50, and was taken aback by me walking in. Guess customers don't usually stop by this late. I asked him if I could park for a couple hours. He mentioned right away that the station was closing in 15 minutes, and he would be leaving, but that if I was comfortable staying at the empty place overnight, then he didn't mind. I thanked him and bought a couple energy drinks for tomorrow, then headed back out to my car. But I replayed the conversation in my head, and I thought it was kind of weird the way he said, if I was comfortable. It sounded like he was saying I really shouldn't be, or that most people around here wouldn't be comfortable with it. I figured maybe he meant that most people just didn't sleep in their cars, and not that sleeping in my car here specifically is the problem. I got back in my car and laid the seat back, setting an alarm for 3 a.m., which was about 4 hours from then. After 15 minutes, I heard the guy lock up the gas station doors, and his car drive away. I looked around. Now, without the gas station lights on, it was pitch black, and extremely quiet. It was actually kind of eerie, being alone there. I closed my eyes again. Honestly, I'm unsure whether I fell asleep or not, because my eyes were closed and I was trying to for so long, at least an hour or so, when I suddenly heard the sound of tires pulling into the gravel outside of the gas station. They got closer and closer, until I eventually opened my eyes to see what was going on. I felt my heart get a little faster, seeing a dark pickup truck right beside my car. What the hell were they doing here? None of their headlights were on either. I couldn't see the driver, or really anything other than the truck outlined by the darkness around it. But it was facing me, so I felt like there was a chance whoever was in there could see me. I got really uncomfortable and didn't want to take any chances. I quickly put my seat back up, turned my car on, and drove out of there. I hoped it was nothing, but the way it all happened felt really strange. An empty, closed gas station in the middle of nowhere, and a truck decides to pull in with all its lights off and pull right up to my car. Couldn't really think of how that wasn't something bad. Getting out of there and back on the road made me feel a lot safer though. However, I barely got a quarter mile away from the gas station before I hit something in the middle of the gravel road. I only caught a glimpse of it in my headlights before my tire ran it over, and it sounded like a pretty bad hit. I quickly pulled off to the side and looked in my rear mirror, but couldn't get a good enough look, so I put the car in park and stepped out. Again, I noticed how quiet it was outside. Just the cold wind blowing around as I walked down the road and tried to see what it was that I hit. It looked like a large duffel bag, but like really large. And honestly, the reason I was so curious as to get out and look is because it kind of looked like a body bag. Maybe it was just my mind's tendency to always think the worst. But I didn't even get close enough to it before hearing the distant sound of tires pushing through the gravel down the road. I looked up and saw nothing but pitch black as the sound got closer and closer. I ran back to my car and got in. I glanced in my mirror as the sound got even louder before that truck suddenly appeared in my back headlights. Looked like they were going insanely fast, speeding right past the object in the road and suddenly slamming on their brakes and swerving behind my car, abruptly stopping. The front and side door both opened and two men jumped out, but by then I was already flooring it back down the road. I couldn't believe how much my hands were shaking as I tried to call 911. Each time, the call would connect for a couple of seconds, then the line would drop because I had no signal. Thankfully, I don't think the truck continued to follow me though, as I never saw them again. That stretch of road went on for maybe 45 minutes before I found a different road to get on that led to a more populated area. Calling the police at that point probably didn't help much, but I did anyway. Half hour later, I got a call back saying they found nothing at all in the area. The rest of the drive, and honestly the entire trip, I was genuinely horrified of what I might have stumbled across that night. I don't know what that truck was up to, or what I saw in the middle of the road, but thinking about what it all could have been still gives me chills. I never took that way ever again, and haven't heard of any information as to what might have happened that night. I was on a road trip from basically the East Coast to the West Coast. I had plans to meet up with some friends, but was also taking the road trip just for fun. I'd only ever flown to individual cities in the West, so I was excited to check out or at least drive through some of the other areas. I had the whole route planned, but on my third day of driving, I entered a part of the highway that was under heavy construction. My maps told me there was a road closure ahead, and directed me to get off the highway and onto a small one-lane road that went right along the highway. Now, right away, I did notice that no other cars seemed to get off when I did. They all were turning and going a different way. However, I figured it was just that they were all headed in a different direction. Maybe there was a big city that way or something. I didn't know because I didn't know the area. I wasn't worried about it because my maps told me to go this way, and it was pretty much just going right along the highway anyways. Only difference was it was a smaller road and a lower speed limit. I think I got on this road around 7, so it was already dark. I should mention this trip was just toward the beginning of winter, and it was snowing a bit during this part of the road trip. Anyway, as I got further and further down this road, I only became more aware of just how empty it was. and eventually it veered away from the main highway and out into what looked like nothing. I had no idea where it was leading me, but my maps said I was still going the right way, and the estimated time to arrive at my destination looked normal, so I figured I was still good. After an hour at least, I saw a cluster of lights in the distance. Looked like a small town, which was great because I was running low on gas. Few minutes later, I was close enough to see that this cluster of lights really was only maybe 15 to 20 buildings. None of them had anything more than a couple of small outdoor lights on. The small town looked very old and run down, and honestly deserted. Sure, there were some lights on, but it still felt off. I drove up to the gas station, just some small vacant building on the edge of the town. There was a flickering light on the overhang, and the pump seemed to be working, so I got out and started filling the tank. Oddly, there was actually another car at the gas station. It was a small grayish SUV, parked at the pump across from me. Its windows weren't tinted or anything, so I could clearly see through them. Looked like there was a bunch of stuff packed in it, suitcases and whatnot, looking like they too were on a road trip. But nobody was inside of it, and nobody was outside of the car either. Wasn't sure where they were, because the gas station building was clearly closed, and this SUV definitely didn't belong to this town. It looked like they were just passing through. I started to feel a little more uncomfortable. The town had this really eerie feeling to it. It was also real quiet out there. The dead silence gave me shivers every time I looked out at the darkness and the empty streets. To make things worse, the gas was filling up extremely slow. Took a whole minute just for a single gallon, which probably wasn't even enough to get over to the next town, wherever the hell that was. And I think it was after being there for 2 minutes, waiting in the dark silence, that there was a sudden scream in the distance. It was a male voice, screaming for help. I was so on edge already that it made me jump back and slam my shoulder against the gas pump. I stared out in the direction it came from, but it was a complete blackout. There was something about the voice that didn't feel right. I took a few steps away from my car, just to get a clearer view of the area. Then the man yelled again. He was way closer this time, like somewhere in the dark right outside of the gas station. I looked out there for just about 20 seconds, listening to the eerie silence that followed his voice, before sudden movement in the side of my view caught my attention. It looked like someone running through the dark toward the back of the gas station, and almost as soon as I saw that, something else moved in another part of the dark. I felt like I was going insane, and my gut told me to get the hell out of this town immediately. I quickly started taking the pump out. As I did, I could hear multiple people running around in the grass just outside of the gas station. I hurried into my car, and that's when several guys came out of the dark, clearly all coordinated in whatever plan they had. They began sprinting toward me just as I got it into drive. I sped out of there and straight back onto the deserted road. I keep thinking about that empty car that was there, seeming to be on a road trip just like I was, probably getting there just a few minutes before I did. Was the person calling out for help in the dark attacked by the same men I saw? Or maybe the person calling out for help is what lured the other driver out there, only for who knows what to happen. There wasn't even a police station at that town, so although I reported the situation, I have no idea if they even drove out there to look. I never got any updates on what really happened at that town. I was 23 and driving across the country in a small van. It wasn't one of those really nice ones with the whole setup or anything. Mine wasn't big and basically just had a mattress in the back with a bunch of stuff in cardboard boxes all over the floor. My parents lived on the West Coast, where I was headed to store a lot of my stuff at their place, while I figured out my whole situation. It was kind of a mess, to be honest. Anyway, this was my first time even going on a drive this far, and not staying in any hotels along the way. The first full day went decently. It was exhausting, but manageable. I think I drove a total of 14 hours, so by the time I felt ready to stop for the night, it was around 12 a.m. There was a sign for a rest stop in 20 miles, which I assumed would have a bunch of truckers and other cars also staying there to sleep. However, when I pulled in, I immediately noticed how wrong I was. The rest stop was down an exit ramp from the highway and went sort of into a wooded area, with trees covering all views of the road, and there wasn't a single car or truck there. When I parked and looked around, I got a really unsettling feeling. It was so tucked away and isolated from the highway, and with nobody else around, it felt almost like I was parked at an abandoned building in the middle of a desolate forest. You'd think nobody being around would be peaceful, but it was the exact opposite. I turned my van off and got out to go into the building and use the restroom. Couldn't even hear any cars on the highway. It was just the calm sound of cicadas in the trees. I walked into the rest stop, and it was fairly clean. I don't know if that meant people were here a lot, or the other way around. As I walked back to my van, though, I got that uneasy feeling again. The forest around me was really dense, and it almost felt like something or someone was lurking out there. Of course, I chalked the feeling up to being nervous about my first time sleeping in a van at a rest stop, and nothing more. I got inside and pulled a curtain across the front of the cab, blocking any views from the front into the back. Then I laid down on my mattress, and despite all the unsettling feelings, I was exhausted enough to fall asleep pretty much instantly. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to hearing voices outside of the van. I quickly sat up and listened. Sounded like two men talking somewhere just outside of my van, maybe in the parking spot right next to mine. I checked the time. It was 3 a.m. I thought it was almost impossible that the parking lot went from completely empty to full enough that someone would park right next to me, but I really hoped that was the case. I got up and pulled the curtains back just enough to peek my head out. I looked out at the parking area and didn't see a single other car. Then I looked out the other window, instantly locking eyes with a man staring right at me from just outside the window. I froze, and the man quickly went behind the van walls, away from the window. I backed away and pulled the curtains across the front. Then I froze again. I heard both men whisper back and forth, before it suddenly went quiet. Neither were talking, and I didn't hear any movement. I must have waited 5 minutes before pulling the curtain back and looking around. As it seemed, the men were gone. I looked in all directions, even checking the mirrors, but they were nowhere. They must have snuck away into the woods, which made me even more unsettled. I grabbed my keys, turned on the van, and pulled out of the rest stop. No way I was gonna sleep there after that. I started driving, and I'm not sure if the light hadn't come on yet, or if I was too focused on getting away from there to realize it right away. But I made it just halfway up the ramp leading onto the highway when I noticed my van was really struggling to gain speed. Then I noticed a blinking red light on my dash. It was for my back right tire, and as soon as I saw it, I could feel it too. The wheel felt like it was dragging on the pavement. I looked in the mirror, and it was even more noticeable from there. My stomach sank. It had to be those men outside the van. I really did my best not to panic, but all the horrifying thoughts started to flood my mind. I frantically looked in the mirrors, making sure the guys weren't coming up from anywhere, as I thought of the best way to get out of this situation. The big problem was that since I had stopped on an incline from the road connecting to the highway, the van couldn't go up with the busted tire. And then I heard something outside. I looked up at the forest beside me. I stared out for a second, feeling the tension rising, before a sudden knock came at the window next to me. It was that guy, smiling and knocking on my window. "Hey, need some help? I can change that tire for you, if you need. Don't think you'll be getting out of here anytime soon, with the wheel looking like that," he said in a disturbingly calm voice. I found it really creepy that he didn't come up in a car or anything, and he never mentioned the other guy that I knew I heard him talking to before. I was so scared though, I didn't even respond. I got my phone out and started dialing 911, hoping the man seeing me call the police would scare him enough to leave. But the man knocked on the window again, saying he'd help me and that I didn't need to call anyone. As I started explaining my situation to the operator, the man got more aggressive, hitting the window and even trying to open the door, which was when I knew I couldn't wait for the cops to get here. I needed to leave immediately. I put the van in reverse and started rolling back down the ramp. I'm not gonna lie, it sounded like the van was dying. The scraping and thumping from the wheel, knowing it could fall off and get me even more stranded, was terrifying. The man followed as well, trying to chase my van down to the rest stop. Once I was back on the flat surface of the parking lot, I floored it, this time not stopping on the incline, and barely my van made it up to the highway. I drove a bit, still with the tire making awful sounds and probably killing my van. Then I pulled off and waited for the cops. The men didn't seem to have a car, and they didn't seem to chase me onto the highway, probably because the rest stop was isolated and they could get away with whatever they were trying without any witnesses around. But when the cops arrived and looked for them, they were gone. I'm pretty sure had I stayed in my van and not tried to leave, the men would have broken inside. And if I'd opened the door or let the man try to fix my tire, which obviously he had slashed, the other guy was likely hiding in the forest nearby, waiting to jump me. What they were really trying, I'm not sure. Maybe it was to steal my van and everything in it. But from everything that happened, leaving me as a witness seems unlikely. So I have a feeling that night was really close to being my